I never imagined I'd feel this much emptiness standing in my own house. The walls, once filled with laughter, now seemed to close in, suffocating me with memories I couldn't touch without wincing. I am a man who worked his entire life to provide, to nurture, to create a legacy. Yet in one cruel twist of fate, the person I trusted most, the person I carried through life with every ounce of hope, was the one who would leave me hollow. My son. People see a father like me and think I'm invincible. They see the kind of man who puts on a calm face, who smiles through every setback, who maintains dignity even when the world tests him. But that's a lie I've perfected for years. Inside, I've learned to mask the storm of disappointment, betrayal, and anger. People mistake control for strength, and I let them. I let them because no one knows what it's like to build your world only to have it stripped away by your own flesh and blood. I remember the first time I noticed the cracks. He was young, ambitious, sharp beyond his years, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. Not rebellion, not teenage defiance, but calculation. I chalked it up to intelligence, to natural cunning. I was proud, after all. Every accomplishment of his felt like mine multiplied. And yet, beneath that pride, there was always a shadow I didn't want to see, didn't want to acknowledge. Because it was easier to believe in the son I dreamed of than the man who was quietly plotting a future without me in it. Money, property, inheritance, these were the easy things for people to dispute. The complicated, messy reality. Love twisted into resentment. Trust weaponized. I had given him every tool to succeed, every opportunity to reach higher than I ever had, but somewhere along the line that gratitude mutated. It became entitlement. It became betrayal. Some nights, I lie awake replaying moments in my head, trying to find the first point where the path forked, where I failed to notice the subtle signs. Was it the way he argued over minor financial decisions I should have entrusted to him years ago? Or the sharp words about legacy and ambition that cut deeper than any physical wound ever could? Maybe it was when I realized he didn't see me as a father anymore, just as a stepping stone. I am not a man who seeks pity. I am not naive, nor am I weak. But I am human, and humans bleed when the ones they love turn into strangers, when the very people they've sacrificed for treat them like obstacles. And as I stare at the framed photograph of him on the day of his college graduation, the same photo I had once hung with pride, I feel a new kind of clarity. Betrayal is a blade, sharp and cold, and it has already cut me to the bone. I know, in that instant, that whatever comes next, I will not be the same man. My calm facade is gone, replaced by a calculated resolve. Pain has a way of sharpening a mind that fear cannot touch. And my mind is already turning, thinking, planning, waiting. The phone call hit me like a bullet I didn't see coming. I held it in my hand, staring at his name flashing on the screen. My chest tightened, a familiar unease crawling up my spine. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the forced cheer in his voice, a tone I'd once known as innocence. But now it was distant, cold, almost foreign. "I wanted you to be the first to know," he said, and for a moment I thought he was going to share something good. Something I could be proud of. But that hope died the second he delivered the blow. "I've decided you're not invited to my IPO celebration." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. My son, my own blood, had banned me from witnessing what should have been the crowning achievement of my guidance, my sacrifices. My life's work poured into raising him. The very celebration of his billion-dollar dream, the dream I had nurtured since he was a child, would take place without me. I remember my hands trembling. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white, as he continued to speak. "It's not personal," he added, the lie dripping from his words like acid. I want this to be about me and my team." I wanted to scream, to yell, to tell him that nothing, no IPO, no stock, no fortune, was worth severing the bond between father and son. But instead, I listened. I listened as he detailed the guest list, the press coverage, the grandeur of an event I would never see. And with every word, I felt the jagged knife of betrayal twist deeper. That night, I sat in my study, staring at the floor, replaying the call over and over. The pain wasn't just about being excluded. It was about recognition stolen, about trust broken, about a lifetime of guidance being discarded as if it were meaningless. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every penny invested in him had been reduced to a footnote in his story. I thought about the inheritance disputes that had quietly begun years ago, the subtle manipulation of family finances, the whispered conversations behind my back. The signs had been there, but I had been blinded by love, by pride, by a refusal to see the darkness growing inside my son. I realized then, sitting alone in the dim light, that this wasn't just about an IPO celebration. This was a declaration that I was expendable, irrelevant, replaceable. And if he could do this, what else might he take? How far would he go to erase me from his narrative? Anger surged, hot and relentless. But alongside it was something sharper, colder, a clarity that this was not the end, not for me. Betrayal, I understood, was a weapon, and weapons could be used in return. I would not react blindly. I would not lash out and lose myself in petty rage. This required precision, calculation, patience. Sleep became a stranger. Nights stretched endlessly as I wrestled with emotions I had never allowed myself to feel so raw, so consuming. Anger, yes, but also disbelief, sorrow, and an unbearable sense of humiliation. My own son had treated me like a ghost, a relic of a past he no longer wanted to acknowledge. And yet, beneath the storm of rage, there was a quiet, knowing question: how had it come to this? I replayed every interaction, every word, every moment of subtle tension I had dismissed over the years. The dinner conversations where he sidestepped my advice, the veiled criticisms of my decisions, the sudden independence that seemed more like a severing of ties. Each memory became a puzzle piece of a betrayal I had refused to see. And with each piece, my grief twisted into something darker, a sense of being powerless in my own life. Sitting alone in the study, I confronted the harsh truth. I had raised him, guided him, given him every advantage I could. And yet, he saw me as an obstacle, not a mentor. The realization was suffocating. I could feel my heart tightening, my thoughts spinning into chaos. The man who once sought my approval now rejected me outright. The fatherly pride I had carried all my life felt shattered, replaced with something unrecognizable, a cold, simmering resolve. I spoke to myself in the silence. You can't let this go. You can't just forgive this. Not now. Not ever. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. I questioned whether my desire for revenge would consume me entirely, whether it would make me as cruel as he had been. I could feel the tug of war inside me, the part of me that still longed for reconciliation, for a bridge back to the son I loved, clashing with the part that craved justice, perhaps even destruction. I remembered the moments when I had believed in his dreams more than in my own. Every sleepless night, every dollar invested, every risk taken, it had been for him. And now, those dreams had become weapons, turned against me in the most personal, humiliating way imaginable. The IPO celebration, once a symbol of shared triumph, had become a monument to my erasure. I tried to find solace in logic and reason, but the betrayal cut too deep for cold calculations alone. My mind oscillated between plotting and mourning, each thought dragging me deeper into a dark labyrinth of emotional turbulence. And yet, in that darkness, a spark began to emerge, a slow, deliberate clarity. I realized that I didn't have to act out of desperation. I didn't need to react immediately. Pain could be sharpened, focused, and transformed into strategy. I would not let my anger blind me. I would let it fuel me. Every humiliation, every slight, every betrayal would be remembered and repaid with precision. But it would require patience, observation, timing. I spent weeks in silence, the house around me seeming to shrink with every passing day. No one could see the storm brewing behind my calm exterior, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The difference between revenge and recklessness, I reminded myself, was strategy. And I had every intention of executing mine flawlessly. I began by retracing the path of his billion-dollar dream, the one he thought had erased me from the picture. I studied every public announcement, every financial report, every partnership he had carefully curated to appear untouchable. I made lists, charts, and timelines, anything that would reveal weaknesses, dependencies, or overconfidence. And over countless nights, I discovered them, subtle cracks he had overlooked, vulnerabilities born from arrogance, greed, and haste. But it wasn't just about business. Revenge, I realized, had to be personal. It had to strike at the very core of the man who had denied me. I thought back to conversations, offhand remarks, even social media posts that hinted at his insecurities. Every brag, every boast, every slight against me had left a trail, and I was tracing it meticulously. The more I delved, the clearer the pattern became. Pride was his blind spot, overconfidence his Achilles heel, and pride, when manipulated correctly, could be more dangerous than any financial collapse. I also began testing the limits of my own patience and discipline. I reviewed the inheritance documents, The business contracts, even the smallest transactions I had once overlooked. If he had been subtle, I could be subtler. Every detail mattered. Every overlooked clause, every casual handshake, every casual word in a private meeting could be leveraged. I would turn his own world against him using nothing more than observation, timing, and meticulous planning. Yet the most critical preparation wasn't external, it was internal. I knew that a single misstep driven by emotion could ruin everything. I meditated, I wrote detailed scenarios, I imagined his reactions to every move I might make. I trained myself to wait, to observe, to plan for contingencies. I became a student of patience, the kind that sharpens the mind while softening the body for the long game. And there was another element, secrecy. My preparations had to remain invisible, undetectable. If he sensed even a flicker of suspicion, he would adapt, tighten defenses, and perhaps even strike first. So I wore the mask of the hurt, overlooked father during the day, while at night I became a strategist, cataloging every weakness, mapping every opportunity. It was during these long nights that I realized something crucial. Revenge wasn't about satisfying anger, it was about restoring balance, reclaiming what had been stolen, and making him recognize, in ways he could not ignore, the cost of his betrayal. The first move had to be invisible. That was my rule. No confrontation, no dramatic gestures. Just pressure, slow, subtle, and deniable, the kind that makes a man uneasy without knowing why. I started small. I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in years, old partners, early investors, mentors who remembered the company before it had a name flashy enough for headlines. I didn't accuse, I didn't warn. I simply asked questions. Careful ones. Questions that sounded like concern, like curiosity, like a father trying to understand the empire his son had built without him. Most people talk more than they realize when they think they're educating someone. I listened as they filled in the gaps he had never bothered to explain to me. Accelerated timelines, rush valuations, aggressive promises stacked neatly on top of optimistic projections. Nothing illegal yet, but fragile. All of it dependent on confidence and perception. And perception, I knew, was easier to shake than numbers. At the same time, I made a quiet decision that felt heavier than any business move I'd ever made. I froze my informal support. The introductions I used to make without thinking, the quiet endorsements, the reassuring phone calls that smoothed doubts before they became questions. I stepped back completely. The silence spoke louder than confrontation ever could. Within weeks, I noticed the shift. Emails that used to go unanswered suddenly came to me, polite, cautious inquiries from people trying to reconnect. My son's name came up often, always followed by a pause, a hesitation, something unspoken. I never criticized him. I didn't need to. Doubt grows best when it feels self-discovered. Then came the first crack. He called me late one evening, his voice sharp but controlled. "Have you been talking about me?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. "Talking? No," I said calmly. "People ask questions. I answer honestly." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to decide whether I was a threat or just an annoyance. For the first time in years, he didn't sound untouchable. He sounded unsure. That night, I realized something important. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to stop protecting him. Every empire built on borrowed confidence trembles the moment its foundation withdraws support. And I had been his foundation longer than he'd ever admit. Still, the guilt crept in. He was my son, the child I once held, once believed in without condition. For a brief moment, my resolve wavered. But then I remembered the phone call, the exclusion, the casual way he had erased me from the most defining moment of his life. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. The text haunted me for hours. "We need to talk." Now, 3 simple words, but heavy with the weight of a storm I had been quietly brewing. I didn't rush. I never rushed. Instead, I considered my next steps with the same precision I had used to map every vulnerability he had exposed himself to. When he arrived at my house, he walked in with that familiar confidence, the kind that once made me proud. But now it felt hollow, like armor stretched too thin. I studied him quietly as he spoke, measuring every word, every gesture. He tried to assert control, to dominate the conversation with his usual charisma. But I didn't flinch. I had already rewritten the rules of engagement. "I don't understand," he began, voice tight. "Why are investors asking questions? Why are partnerships being delayed? Something is happening, and it's coming from you." I leaned back in my chair, the calm I had cultivated for months radiating from me. You forgot something essential, I said softly. You built an empire on people's trust, my trust included, and you assumed it would never be questioned. That was your first mistake. He bristled, pride flaring into anger. I did everything myself! I built this company! Every decision, every risk, it was mine! I smiled faintly, a cold, deliberate smile. Did you? Or did you forget all the foundations others laid? All the guidance you ignored until it was inconvenient? For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. The carefully constructed facade of the untouchable young billionaire faltered. I could feel it, the shift. I had planted seeds of doubt long before this conversation, but now in this room, they were sprouting into a realization he could not hide. You've been manipulating things behind my back, he accused, voice rising. This is betrayal. I shook my head slowly. No, this is consequences. Consequences for underestimating those who love you, for thinking respect can be assumed without earning it. You didn't just exclude me from your celebration, you erased me from your story. And stories, my son, always demand balance. He froze as if struck by the weight of my words. His confidence cracked further, replaced by panic. The kind of panic that comes from realizing that control has slipped from your hands. The investors, the partners, the press, it was no longer just him navigating the world. I had altered the rules quietly and irrevocably, and he could feel the walls closing in. I didn't mean. He started, but I cut him off. Intent doesn't matter. The results do. And the result is that your empire, your billion-dollar dream, is vulnerable. And you're only just discovering how vulnerable it is. He looked away, finally seeing me not as the father he once defied, but as a force he could not manipulate or ignore. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. And in that room, for the first time, I was the one holding all the cards. The days after our confrontation were strangely quiet. Too quiet. The storm I had orchestrated was subtle, invisible to anyone outside, but devastating in its effect. Investors hesitated. Partners hesitated. Even his employees began to notice cracks where none should have existed. And through it all, I watched from the shadows, unseen but fully aware of every tremor in the empire he had once thought untouchable. He tried to act as if nothing had happened. The confident, untouchable son, the one who had banished me from his celebration, returned to the office with a forced smile, a mask I had once taught him to wear. But I could see it in the corners of his eyes, the subtle tremor in his voice during meetings, the way he flinched at the smallest hint of criticism. Doubt had seeped into him, the kind that eats away at a person more efficiently than any public scandal. And the repercussions went beyond business. The family noticed it too. Relatives who had been loyal to him began calling me discreetly, sharing whispers of the tension that had risen behind closed doors. Something's off, they said. He's different. The realization hit me hard. Revenge, when executed with precision, doesn't need to shout, it whispers, and the world amplifies it for you. I received my first subtle acknowledgement from him a week later. A terse message, almost trembling with unspoken frustrations. We need to meet again. This isn't over. I smiled, because that message wasn't a threat, it was confirmation. Confirmation that my patience, my careful orchestration, and my strategic withdrawal of support had worked. He was shaken, destabilized, and aware that he could no longer take control without considering me. But victory was never about humiliation alone. I had wanted to teach him a lesson, yes, but a lesson about respect, accountability, and the consequences of betrayal. I watched as he struggled to recalibrate his relationships, realizing that shortcuts, arrogance, and the dismissal of those who truly cared could never substitute for wisdom. And in that struggle, I found a satisfaction deeper than anger, more enduring than revenge, the satisfaction of balance restored, however quietly. Yet, even as I observed his unraveling, I knew the danger wasn't gone. A fractured ego, a desperate mind, and billions of dollars under immense pressure can still be dangerous. I could only control my moves, predict his reactions, and wait for the moments where his miscalculations would confirm the lessons I had silently taught. I reflected on what this all had cost me. My sleep, my peace, the relationship I once hoped to restore. It would never be the same. But sometimes, the price of justice is the loss of what we once cherished most. And perhaps, just perhaps, the lessons learned through consequence are the only lessons some people truly understand. The end didn't come with fanfare. There were no sirens, no public humiliation, just the quiet collapse of the carefully constructed illusion he had built around himself. The IPO proceeded, yes, but the enthusiasm that once surrounded it had evaporated. Investors were wary, partners cautious, and the media sniffed out tension even before it could be fully exposed. My son's billion-dollar dream was still standing, but it was fragile, brittle, and transparent to anyone paying attention. I watched from a distance, a silent observer to the unraveling I had orchestrated. I didn't revel in his misfortune, I reveled in justice. The justice of balance restored, of pride humbled, of betrayal answered. The son who had turned away from me, who had dismissed me from the single event that should have celebrated our shared history, was finally forced to recognize the weight of his actions. We met again, months later, in a small quiet room far from cameras, away from the eyes of the world. His demeanor was different, humbled, wary, almost fragile. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was measured, careful, full of unsaid words he couldn't yet articulate. He started faltering. I didn't understand. I was wrong. I looked at him, my expression neutral but my mind clear. Understanding is a beginning, I said softly. Redemption is earned, and trust is never a right. It is a responsibility. You forgot that. He nodded, swallowing hard, and for the first time I saw a flicker of respect. Not admiration, not gratitude, but recognition. Recognition that actions have consequences, and that betrayal cannot go unanswered without costing something irreplaceable. I left that meeting with a heavy heart but a calm mind. The path I had chosen was not easy. It had required patience, restraint, and a willingness to walk through darkness. But it had also restored something essential, the balance of truth and justice. I reflected on the journey, on the son I had lost to ambition and arrogance, and on the man he had become. There was sorrow, certainly, but there was also clarity. Life does not always grant us the endings we hope for, but it offers lessons for those willing to observe and act with purpose. Some might call it revenge. Some might call it justice. I call it accountability, quiet, deliberate, and inevitable. Because betrayal, no matter how personal, deserves recognition, and the wounds it leaves can only truly heal when the scales are set right. As I walked away from the chaos I had quietly orchestrated, I realized the ultimate lesson: love can be weaponized, trust can be leveraged, and patience can become the deadliest form of power. But even in the darkest moments of betrayal, there is a choice: to be consumed by anger, or to transform it into a force that restores balance and commands respect. Meanie ending cliffhangers. I never expected him to come back fully. Some lessons leave permanent marks, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The boy who once banned me from his dream would never forget the father who made him face the cost of his arrogance. Moral to reflection: betrayal can break trust, but it can also illuminate the strength we never knew we had. True power lies in patience, strategy, and the courage to confront injustice without losing yourself.